The Grimms and Anderson. What's the story? There's nothing like a good story. It captures the imagination, evokes strong emotions, and keeps us hooked till the end. The best tales can even help us with our own life stories. It's thus no wonder that both Grimm's fairy tales and Hans Christian Andersen's tales have stayed popular over the years. Although both are considered children's stories, the ways in which they were created are actually quite different. Firmly rooted in oral tradition, the tales in Grimm's fairy tales were originally folk tales passed down for generations in Germany. Then, in the early 19th century, two brothers finally decided to put these cultural treasures to paper. Their first volume of 86 stories was published in 1812. By 1857, the total number had risen to 200 tales, and they've all been in print since. Widely considered to be perfect reading for children, the Grimm stories usually contain important moral lessons. Tales like Sleeping Beauty and Little Red Riding Hood are about good and evil. With their simple but exciting plots, they show us what Germans have, for centuries, regarded as right and wrong. These stories are culture, social rules, and happy endings, all rolled and told into one.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to English for You. I'm Mike.
I'm Nikki.
And today we are beginning a two-day article looking at the you can't really say two people, the three people that are responsible for some of the most famous fairy tales in history. Two of them are brothers, and one of them is a single guy. Both European, both have interesting stories, and also left us with a library of wonderful tales that I think a lot of us are very familiar with.
When we were little.
Did you read fairy tales, or did your parents have a fairy tale book that you used to read as a little kid?
A selection
you
of
did?
them, yeah.
Okay, and of course, many of these, of course, have become famous Disney movies and other cartoons and stuff like that. So even if you don't know the names of the writers, you will definitely be familiar with some of their stories. And you might also be interested and surprised to find out, A, where the stories came from, and B, how much the stories have changed in some cases from when they are originally written to the stories we kind of know today. So let's get into it. The title gives us the names of these people. The Grimms and Andersen. What's the story? Okay, so what's the story? That's just kind of like, tell me more. I want more information. If something exciting happened and one of your friends knows about it, you might say, hey, you were downtown when there was that accident. What's the story? What happened?
Tell us everything.
Yeah, what did you see? We want to hear about all of it. So what's the story? And of course, these guys also wrote stories, right? Fairy tales or stories for children. So that's a good title there. Let's get into our article. It says, there's nothing like a good story. It captures the imagination, evokes strong emotions, and keeps us hooked till the end. Absolutely, a good story can do all of that and more. And then we read, the best tales can even help us with our own life stories. Yeah, it's true. You can read a story about people far away, nothing like you, but often in good stories you can find something that relates and connects to your life as well.
那这边我们看到 language and focus. Let's take a look. There is nothing 的句型指的就是 there's nothing like something 可以加上名词或者是 VING 没有什么比得上 So for example, there's nothing like a hot chocolate during a cold night 就是在很冷的时候喝上一杯热巧克力实在是太棒了 There's nothing like a big scoop of ice cream on a hot summer day 那另外呢可以用到比较级 There's nothing more exciting than going to Disneyland Or, there's nothing sadder than spending Christmas by yourself with your whole family being abroad. 自己一个人要过圣诞节实在是太难过了。那相信大家从小到大一定听过很多故事。今天课文要介绍到格林童话以及安徒生童话。那一个好的故事肯定会有这几个要素，会延伸我们的想象力，唤起我们的情感，或者是让我们想要一直看下去。那 capture the imagination 指的就是引起某人的兴趣 capture 这个动词指的是 catch or get 那 evoke strong emotions 这边指的就是唤起 evoke 这个动词是唤起 evoke memories or evoke sympathy 那 hooked 这个形容词指的是着了迷 If you're hooked, you're kind of addicted to something.
It's thus no wonder that both Grimm's fairy tales and Hans Christian Andersen's tales have stayed popular over the years. So yeah, it's thus no wonder. That's kind of like it's not surprising, right? We're not surprised that these stories, Grimm's fairy tales, that's the first group, and Hans Christian Andersen, that's the man who wrote other stories, both of their tales have stayed popular over the years. When you see the word tales, you can just read the word as stories, right? A tale is a story. A fairy tales are stories for children. And yeah, it's true. These stories have stayed popular over the years, over the decades. I think also even over the centuries, right? It's been more than 100 years since many of these stories were popular. Popular then, still popular today. Although both are considered children's stories, the ways in which they were created are actually quite different. So they're enjoyed by the same kinds of people today, but where those stories came from is actually quite different, one from the other. So yes, fairy tale. This is an important thing to know. It's a story often with a moral, some kind of life lesson about being good and not being bad. That's what we kind of think of as a moral. And they're written for young children. They can be enjoyed by anyone. But these kind of simple stories of good and bad, and usually the good will win in the end, and the bad person will be brought down by their evil, by their bad actions. So that's the moral, and they're written for kids. For example, many fairy tales have been turned into cartoon movies. Think of Cinderella, Snow White, Sleeping Beauty, and many, many, many others.
所以 fairy tales 这个名词指的就是童话故事 some invented stories for kids 那通常里面会有 magic, imaginary creatures, stories that start with once upon a time, there's something, something, something. Those are fairy tales. 那另外看到 it's no wonder that 指的就是难怪没想到一定会是这样
All right, so let's look at the first group, Grimm's fairy tales. It says, firmly rooted in oral tradition, the tales in Grimm's fairy tales were originally folk tales, passed down for generations in Germany. So that's true. Yeah, the Grimm brothers didn't really write these stories. They actually traveled around the small towns and villages of Germany and collected these stories because they are rooted or they come from the oral tradition, the tradition of sitting around after dinner, or around a campfire and telling stories to each other. Oral meaning spoken, so not written down, just sort of passed from parent to child for generation to generation. That is where they came from. So the tales in Grimm's fairy tales were originally, or in the beginning, folk tales passed down for generations, as I said, from parent to child to parent to child, for many, many years. Originally, meaning at the beginning or when they first started, when they first come from, when we trace the history of something back to the beginning, we're going back to how it was originally, how it was at the beginning, because, of course, many things start in one way and then change over time. Here's an example. Nintendo was originally a company that made playing cards, not computer games in any way.
那格林童话最一开始其实是在德国透过口语相传下去了。Originally 这个副词指的是起初原来 in the beginning and then something changes or happens. 那它的形容词 original 指的就是新的 something original is something new. 那它的名词 origin 指的就是它的起源。那另外看到 rooted in 指的就是根源于某一个东西某一个地方。那另外还有 pass something down 就是传给后人或者是把它传下去。那 generation 这个名词指的就是一代一代。So for example, generation gap 就是我们那个世代的鸿沟。
All right, so these stories have been told from parents to child in Germany for hundreds or maybe even more than 1,000 years. But if you lived in one part of Germany, you might not know stories from other parts of Germany because they were very local. Then, in the early 19th century, two brothers finally decided to put these cultural treasures to paper. So someone decided, you know what? We've got to record these stories. Maybe they were thinking we can sell them in a book. Oh. They also might have been thinking these stories could disappear, right? If people stop telling them, if a parent dies or a person dies and they don't have children, they might not pass these stories. So these cultural treasures would disappear. They wanted to preserve or save or keep these wonderful cultural treasures. Cultural meaning having to do with culture. And culture is about language and religion and food and beliefs and traditions and all sorts of things. The things that make different groups of people different from each other often comes down to cultural things. Here's an example. The British Museum in London contains artistic, historic, and cultural treasures from all around the world.
那到了19世纪的时候，才有一对兄弟决定要把这些故事记载下来。这边 cultural 这个形容词指的是文化的 about art, literature, language, music, food or traditions. 那我们就会看到 cultural differences 文化的不同 cultural identity 或者是它的名词 culture 指的就是文化。那我们常常听到的 culture shock 指的就是文化冲击。
It says their first volume of 86 stories was published in 1812. So more than 200 years ago, that's when the first collection or volume of these stories was published. When something is published, it's like a book is being made, it's being printed, it's being turned into a book, and of course it will then be available to buy. So the first volume was 86 stories. That's what was inside. You would get 86 stories in one book. That came out in 1812. And then by 1857, the total number had risen to 200 tales. And they've all been in print since.
That's a lot of tales.
That is a lot of tales. I guess the first book might have been popular, so then they had more people writing in and saying, well, we have a story from our village, and here it is. So they ended up with a lot more. But the first volume was already 86 stories, and I bet a lot of the famous ones, like Snow White or Hansel and Gretel and things like that, they might have been in that first volume. What is a volume? A volume is basically a book that's part of a series of books. Often we use this for books that kind of come out every year, right? So we might talk about a new volume of the telephone book or a dictionary or an encyclopedia or something like that. Or it might also be a book that's so popular, it gets printed again and again and again, and there might be many different versions of that book, but the volume will come from one specific year. So if you have an older volume of the book, it might be worth more money or something like that. But basically, it's a book that is part of a series of books. It's not just one book on its own. For example, have they added any new words to the new volume of the dictionary? Yeah, most of those dictionaries, books that explain what words mean, they have new volumes almost every year. And of course, they'll add in new words, like new internet words, for example.
那它的第一册是在1812年的时候出版，就已经有86则故事了。到了1857年的时候，竟然就高达了200则的故事。而且自从那时候开始，他们就一直都有在出版。Volume 这个名词指的是卷或者是册 for books. So for example, there are 7 volumes for Harry Potter in total. 那 volume 还有另外一个意思就是音量 the amount of sound produced by TV or music. For example, turn the volume up or turn the volume down. 那我们另外看到了 publish 这个动词指的是 when you publish a book or a magazine, you write it 出版 you print it and you sell it. 那 in print 指的就是正在发行 You can still buy it to get it somewhere. So something is in print, you can still buy it. Now the opposite would be out of print. It's not possible to buy it.
It says widely considered to be perfect reading for children, the Grimm stories usually contain important moral lessons. Yeah, they've been popular, these books, for more than 200 years. So it makes sense that they're considered or they're thought of as to be perfect reading, the perfect kind of book for children. And here's a reason why. The Grimm stories usually contain important moral lessons. So they're not only entertaining, and they've been entertaining people for a long time, but they also contain or have inside of them an important lesson about right and wrong, doing the right thing and not doing the wrong thing, that kind of lesson for children. To contain is basically, as I said, to have something inside another thing. All right, so if you have a wallet, your wallet might contain money or your cards, your credit card or your MRT card or something like that. When you pack and go on a vacation, your suitcase will contain all the things you need for that holiday, right? Your toothbrush, your clothes, your shoes, your sunglasses, maybe a book or something like that. It's inside that bag, that suitcase, that piece of luggage. Here's an example. My bag just contains a bottle of water, a pair of running shoes, and my gym clothes. Maybe I'm just going to the gym, so that's all I need my bag to contain. Moral, as I said, is teaching or showing goodness or correctness of character and behavior. Basically, it's doing the right thing when you have a choice. So it's not just following the law, it's doing the right thing even if you could do something a little bit naughty. but you don't do it because, you have morals or it's the moral thing to do. It's the right thing to do. For example, giving your seat on the MRT or bus to someone who needs it more than you is a clear demonstration of good moral character. You don't have to stand up.You're doing it because it's the right thing to do.
那格林童话同时也被认为是很适合儿童的读本。通常这些故事里面都会包含一些重要的寓意。Contain 这个动词指的就是包含 to have something inside. And it could also mean control or hide a strong emotion. So for example, I can no longer contain my anger and I really want to punch something. 就是很生气，没有办法控制我的情绪了。那 moral 这个形容词指的就是道德的或者是伦理的 something about right and wrong, good and evil. So we have moral standards, moral value, 我们的道德伦理的价值观。A moral dilemma 指的就是道德的两难。
All right, so here's some examples of famous fairy tales with clear moral lessons. Tales like Sleeping Beauty and Little Red Riding Hood are about good and evil. With their simple but exciting plots,They show us what Germans have for centuries regarded as right and wrong. And I think a lot of these ideas aren't just true in Germany, but they're true around the world. So yeah, those are some good stories, good examples, and they have exciting plots or stories, but they also have that moral lesson in them.
Exactly. 那像是我们耳熟能详的睡美人或者是小红帽，都是和善恶对错是非有关的故事。那这些故事都很简单易懂，但是有着很有趣的情节。我们也可以借此了解德国人所认知的世界以及对错。Plot 这个名词指的是书或者是电影的情节。我们很常听到 a plot twist 指的就是 an unexpected change in a series, TV, or book.
These stories are culture, social rules, and happy endings all rolled and told into one. That might be another reason they've been so popular.Their culture, you learn about German culture, social rules, morals, what's right, what's wrong, how to be a good person, and they all have a happy ending. It's all in one little package, and there's 86 of those stories in the first volume. Kind of makes sense that they were so popular.
那 all roll into one 指的就是集于一身，也就是说，看了格林童话的故事后，我们可以学到有关文化和社会规范相关的议题，而且也可以看到美好的结局。那不想错过更精彩的 English for You 内容，就赶快订阅我们的 YouTube 频道和追踪 Facebook 吧。
All right, we have our chat question before we wrap things up. Which one of Grimm's fairy tales is your favorite and what happens in the story?
Oh, you mentioned Hansel and Gretel.
Ooh, Hansel and Gretel.
Yeah, Gretel. Yeah, I love that story.
Okay.
Because they were abandoned. No, I'm kidding. Because they found a way to go back home, right?
Yes, they did. And what happened to the witch at the end of that story?
She died.
How did she die?
They ate her?
In the one I remember, they push her into the oven, right? She was going to kick. She was going to cook
the
Hansel,
brother. Yeah.
Right, and then they push her into the oven. One thing about the Grimm stories, they've changed over time. A lot of the original ones are really
violent.
Yeah. And I think the original story, and I remember this, the original ending, Hansel and Gretel make the witch dance in red-hot iron shoes until she dies.
That's
pretty mean, right?
I
mean, that's terrible. So you kind of wonder. But, people have become less comfortable with, violent things like that, especially in children's stories. So they have changed a little bit over the years. But, that's just the details, the moral story, the main plot. It's always been the same. So it is kind of interesting, though, how some of these stories have changed a little bit over the years. But they're really great, and we're going to be moving from the Grimm brothers to Hans Christian Andersen tomorrow. So please come back and join us for that. Vocabulary Review.
Fairy tale. This fairy tale is about a girl who saves her 11 brothers after they are changed into swans. Originally. Olivia originally planned to visit her grandparents, but she decided to go to the museum instead. Cultural. The cultural program at the museum featured traditional dance, art, and music from several countries. Volume. The first volume of the novels introduces the main characters and sets up the story. Contain. This soap contains many bad chemicals, so using it will make your skin feel dry and uncomfortable. Moral. The children's book includes several moral stories that focus on the importance of respecting others.
智慧小补帖
Evoke. Hooked. Generation. Publish. Plot.